What's up everyone, Patrick here, welcome back, and moving on to the next question, dealing with valuations. So suppose that the same pair of shoes sells in both Canada and the United States, and the exchange rate currently is 0.76 USD per CAD. So question one, what would the price of the shoes be in part A USD if the price in Canada was $200 Canadian? And part B in Canadian dollars if the price in the US was 200 USD. And then number two, how would you execute an arbitrage opportunity if the shoe sold in Canada for $300 Canadian and in the US at 216 USD? So this is a question dealing with exchange rates, and sometimes exchange rates can get a little bit complicated for students, especially the way it's explained a lot of the times. And so I'm going to take my time explaining this question, especially number two. I'm going to show you multiple perspectives that you can go about it. Usually this kind of question may take you like 5 minutes to do, but this video is probably going to be longer than 5 minutes because I want to dig deep and just make sure you really understand how to work with exchange rates, because sometimes they can get a little complex. So I'm going to erase these questions here, give myself some room. So starting with number 1A, we're asked to find what the USD price is going to be if the Canadian price is 200 CAD. And so what we would do is use this exchange rate here. Now, this exchange rate, what it means whenever you have this currency per this currency and then you have a number here, it basically means that for every 76 cents of the US dollar, you're going to receive $1 Canadian. Or $1 Canadian dollar will give you 76 cents of the US dollar. Right? So whenever you see this kind of format, this is what it always means. There's like a, how I like to think about it, there's like an imaginary one over here, like that. And so once you have this format and you get a question like this, it's very easy to solve because notice we're solving for USD here. With the exchange rate given, the USD is in the numerator, and so we're going to be solving USD. You could put a variable there. Let's put X, and we're given the Canadian price down here. And so kind of, first you want to match up the currencies, but then if you want to kind of get rid of these currency values, you could just create this as a mathematical expression like that. And then from there, it's super easy. You just cross multiply. 1 times x is x. 200 times 0.76 would give you 152. And so that's the answer for 1A. So the USD price with that exchange rate, if the shoes sell for 200 Canadian, then the USD price should be 152. USD. And that's pretty much personally how I work with these exchange rates. I create a fraction like this depending on what's given here. Now it doesn't have to be USD per CAD. We could have had a number, some kind of number here, CAD per USD, and it'd be greater than 1. Right? The way you could get that number is you could take 1 divided by 0.76, but whatever that number would be, you'd have that number here. Let's say it's like it isn't, but let's say it's like $1.20. You'd have $1.20 CAD per 1 USD, and then you would just use that exchange rate. And then the numerators would then be in CAD, the denominators would be in USD. But in this case, we're given USD per CAD. And so when we're solving, you just want to make sure that that's in line right there. Right? So that's the answer for 1A. Now, what about 1B? Notice in 1B, what's happening is we're given the USD price. The USD price we're given as 200 USD. and we're asked to solve for the Canadian price. And so we're still using this exact same exchange rate. This is not changing here. But now we're solving for CAD. So we put an X there, and we're given the USD price. Like that, right? It's still in line over here. It's just now we're solving for Canadian. And so to kind of show this a little nicer, without these currency symbols, this is what we have to solve. And so X times 0.76 would give us 0.76X, and then 200 times 1 would give us 200, and then divide by 0.76. And so if we round to the nearest dollar, X would end up being 263 Canadian. I think it's like 263.16. I'm going to leave it to the nearest dollar, so 263 Canadian. And so that ends up being the answer for 1B. So with this exchange rate, if the shoes are selling in the US for 200 USD, in Canada, they should be selling for 263 Canadian. Now moving on to number 2, we're asked, how would you execute an arbitrage opportunity if in the US the shoes sell for 216 USD, while in Canada they sell for 300 CAD. And so what we want to do, we're either going to buy the USD shoes and then sell them in Canadian, or we're going to buy the Canadian shoes. It's the same shoes, just in CAD we're going to buy them, and then we're going to sell them in USD. We're going to execute either one of those two. And just in general, what you want to do is you want to buy the undervalued currency. And then you want to sell the overvalued currency. So if the USD is going to be undervalued, we're going to take this strategy. We're going to buy the USD and we're going to sell the Canadian. Because if the USD is undervalued, then simultaneously that means the Canadian dollar is going to be overvalued. Or if we find that the Canadian dollar is going to be undervalued, then the USD is going to be overvalued, we would buy the Canadian, sell the USD. The question is, how do we figure out which one is undervalued, which one is overvalued? And so I'm going to show you multiple ways to go about this. Now, we have to figure out, how does this here compare to the exchange rate? Because the exchange rate, whenever they give you a current exchange rate, this always represents what it should be. That's the market rate right there. So that's the proper rate, quote unquote. That's what it should be, versus these prices here, this is what it is. So this is what it should be. When you're given a scenario like this, it's what it is. And so one way we can go about it is we can take that exchange rate. If we set it up as a fraction like before, 76 USD per $1 CAD, what we can do is we can take one of these values. So let's take the 300 CAD first and figure out what should be the USD value. Right? If we have 300 CAD, this is the exchange rate, the market exchange rate. What should be the USD value of the shoes. And so applying that same methodology, 1 times x is x, 0.76 times 300 would give us 228 USD. So you could intuitively now think about it. So this here is what the shoes should be worth, but they are in the market selling for 216. So remember, this is what should be. So if something should be worth 228 USD, but it's really selling for 216 USD, well, that means that this is undervalued, and so you want to buy this. Right? And so that's the conclusion. We're going to go with this strategy over here, not this one, because the USD is undervalued. So we want to buy this and then sell this. The Canadian dollar is overvalued. And if you want to see it in terms of CAD, you can do it the other way. So you could take the other price, the 216 USD, and then figure out for that price what should be the Canadian price. And this is what I meant by showing you multiple perspectives on how this conclusion can come about. So notice here, if we solve for this x times 0.76 would give us 0.76x. 1 times 216 is just 216. Divide by 0.76. And if we round this to the nearest dollar, we would end up with 284 Canadian. Okay, so this here, if the price of the shoes in USD is 216, this is what they should be in Canadian dollars, 284. But they're selling at 300 CAD. So if something is selling, if something should sell at 284, but it's selling at 300, so this is what it should be worth, but it's selling at 300, then it's overpriced, it's overvalued. And so we would want to sell that. We don't want to buy that, right? So that's another way to come up with the same conclusion here. The CAD is overvalued, so we're selling it, which simultaneously means the USD is undervalued, and so we are buying it. Another way to come up with the conclusion, this is actually a common way that is shown in books, is you could take the exchange rate. So remember, the exchange rate is what should be, and that's 0.76 USD per $1 CAD. And what we can do is see in the market what's the exchange rate there between these two values. We'd want to get it in this same kind of format. So what we would do is we would take the 216 USD divided by 300 CAD, right? Keeping this format, USD per CAD. And when you do this, 216 divided by 300 would give you 0.72. And so we would end up with 0.72 USD per 1 CAD, like that. And so notice that 1 CAD here should give us 0.76 cents USD. But based on these prices, what's happening is 1 CAD is giving us 72 cents USD. And so you could intuitively think about it. Here, what should happen is 1 CAD should give us 76 cents, but really, it's giving us currently 72 cents. It should give us 76 cents, but it's giving us 72 cents. And so the CAD is giving us less what it should, which means that it is overvalued. Sorry, not here. This is what actually should be. So over here, the CAD is overvalued, which simultaneously means the USD is undervalued. Right? You kind of intuitively think about it. Or you could think about it the other way. To get $1 Canadian, it should cost us 76 cents USD. To get 1 CAD, it should cost 76 cents, 0.76 USD. But right now, to get 1 CAD, it's costing us only 0.72 USD, 72 cents. So it's taking less USD to get the same CAD versus how it should be, right? Meaning that the CAD is overvalued, the USD is undervalued. Okay, so different ways, this is why I said this is going to take a little longer, to come up with this same conclusion that we want to buy this and sell this. So whichever way you're comfortable, usually the first 2 ways, I usually don't do it like this, though sometimes this way is the way that's shown. I do it the other way. I pick one of these, see what the corresponding price should be, and then I compare those prices and then intuitively think what my strategy would be. Okay, so that's the strategy we would have to undertake. Now, what would the actual process be? How would we actually execute this? Well, there's actually 2 ways. So method 1, to actually show what the arbitrage profit would be, we can get the profit in either USD or we can get it in CAD. So method 1 would be we just flat out buy the USD shoes. And so what's our cash flow here going to be? Well, it's a negative cash flow. We're spending 216 USD. But we receive the shoes, and then what we're going to do, we're going to sell the shoes in Canadian dollars, and we're going to receive 300 CAD. Like that. And so notice here, okay, we bought the USD shoes, or we bought the shoes in USD, 216, and then we sold them in CAD. But notice that with these 2 values here, it's hard to, because they're not the same currency, it's hard to come up with an actual profit just from these 2 values. And so to get everything in line, what you would want to do is you would want to take this 300 Canadian dollars that you received and convert it to USD. So we're going to here convert 300 CAD to USD at the market exchange rate at 0.76 USD per CAD. Right? This is like what the banks are giving you, for example. So we could always go to the bank and exchange at this rate. So we bought the USD shoes, we sold them for Canadian, so now we have 300 Canadian, but now we're going to take that 300 Canadian, we're going to go to the bank, and we're going to exchange it for USD at that rate, at that currency exchange rate. And so what would happen here is we are getting rid of the 300 Canadian, and we're receiving, for the 300 Canadian, we would receive 228 USD at that exchange rate. And so now notice when we net everything out, notice how the plus 300, the minus 300, those net out to 0. And then the minus 216 USD, the positive 228 USD, we can net those out because they're the same currency. And that would give us plus 12 USD. And so that's what our profit would be from this arbitrage opportunity. Now, what if we wanted to show this profit here in Canadian terms? So there's another method to do this. First off, if you wanted to get the corresponding Canadian profit, you could actually just take this 12 USD and convert it to Canadian using that exchange rate. So the final number we're going to get here, that's how you can get to it quickly. But I'm going to show you the actual method, the longer way of doing it. And what would happen here is, let's say we're starting out with Canadian dollars, but because we have to buy the shoes first, what we would have to do is we'd have to take the Canadian dollars and convert them at the beginning. So notice here we did the conversion at the end of the method. Here we're going to convert at the beginning. And so we need 216 USD. Now, with this exchange rate, how much is 216 USD worth? Well, we calculated that before. It was 284 Canadian. Rounded to the nearest dollar, I think it's like 284.21, but let's just use 284. So that means that we need 284 Canadian. We need to convert 284 Canadian to get 216 USD at the bank at this exchange rate. So the first step is we're going to convert 284 CAD at the exchange rate that the bank has given us to receive 216 USD. So we're converting 284 Canadian. So from this transaction, the cash flows is that we're spending 284 Canadian. That's what we're given to the bank, a negative cash flow, to receive 216 USD. Right? Spending 284, getting back 216. So that's a positive cash flow. And so now that we have that 216 USD, we go through these two transactions. So it's kind of like this got flipped. So now we're going to buy the USD shoes. And the USD shoes cost us 216. So this is going to be minus 216. We're spending 216. We receive the shoes, and then we're going to sell the shoes in CAD for the $300. And now we can net all of that out to get the profit. And notice that the profit is going to be in CAD because notice that these two values here net out to 0. 300 CAD minus 284 gives us 16. Again, this is rounded to the nearest dollar. There is going to be, I think it's a little less than 16. It's like $15.80, but I'll just round it up to the nearest dollar. So 16 CAD would be the Canadian profit. So whichever way you go about it, that's two different ways to show that arbitrage profit. All right, so a lot of different perspectives I just threw at you, but again, I wanted to just show all of these so you can kind of find the way you're most comfortable with when you run into a question like this, because questions dealing with currencies can get a little complex. So I wanted to make sure that you fully understand what's going